You have exactly 1 hour to pack whatever fits in 2 suitcases and get those crying brats out of our house. Those words still echo in my mind every morning when I wake up in my penthouse overlooking the city. The woman who spoke them now sends me desperate emails begging for forgiveness, for money, for anything. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The truth about revenge is that it's never as sweet as people say it is. When you've been stripped of everything you thought mattered, when people show you exactly who they are in your darkest moment, the satisfaction of proving them wrong feels hollow. But the strength you discover in that darkness, that's worth everything. Hey everyone, I hope you're doing well wherever you're watching from. Whether you're dealing with your own storms or just taking a break from a beautiful day, I want you to know this story might hit close to home for some of you. It's about discovering that sometimes the people who should love you the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest. My name is Amira, and this is the story of how I went from being a grieving widow clutching my twin babies in the rain outside a mansion to becoming the woman who owns that mansion and 20 others just like it. This is about the night I learned that blood doesn't always mean family. And sometimes the people who claim to love your spouse the most are the first to show you the door when he's gone. Picture this. A woman in a designer black dress, makeup streaked down her cheeks from crying, standing on a marble doorstep with 2 6-month-old babies in her arms while her dead husband's family throws her belongings onto the driveway. That was me 18 months ago. What they didn't know was that I was holding the keys to an empire they thought belonged to them. But before we get to that moment of triumph, let me start from the beginning. Because the beginning is where you'll understand why what happened next was so perfectly, devastatingly just. I was 24 when I met Daniel Harrington. Not the typical age you'd expect for someone to marry into one of the wealthiest families in the country. But love doesn't check your bank account before it hits. I was working as a pediatric nurse at Children's Hospital, pulling double shifts, and living in a studio apartment that cost more than my monthly salary. I believed in working hard, treating people with kindness, and that love could conquer anything. I believed marriage was about partnership, that family meant loyalty, and that when tragedy strikes, people show their true character by stepping up, not stepping away. I was so naive, it almost hurts to remember. Daniel was everything I didn't know I needed. Successful, yes, but not in the flashy way that screams for attention. He ran the family's charitable foundation, spent his days visiting hospitals and schools, funding programs for underprivileged kids. When he walked into my ward that Tuesday morning in his simple Navy suit, asking about our new children's library program, I thought he was just another administrator. He stayed for 3 hours reading to kids, helping with lunch, asking thoughtful questions about what we needed. When he finally introduced himself properly, I nearly dropped the medication tray I was carrying. "Daniel Harrington," he said, extending his hand. "I know the name probably means something to you, but I hope you'll give me a chance to be just Daniel first." The Harrington name meant everything in our city. Hospitals, university buildings, museum wings. Their family had built half the institutions that mattered. Old money, the kind that came with responsibility and reputation, the kind that made people bow their heads in respect. I should have paid more attention to how his family looked at me during our engagement. The polite smiles that never reached their eyes. The way conversations stopped when I entered rooms. The little comments about how refreshing it was that Daniel was dating someone so down to earth. I thought they were warming up to me. I thought the awkwardness would fade after the wedding. His mother, Vivian Harrington, was the kind of woman who could cut you down with a look and make you thank her for it. Tall, elegant, with silver hair, always perfectly styled in diamonds that cost more than most people's houses. She spoke in that particular tone wealthy people use when they're trying to sound gracious, but really want you to know your place. "Amira, darling," she'd say, the endearment dripping with condescension. "I do hope you understand that marrying into this family comes with certain expectations. We have a reputation to maintain. His sister Camille was worse. Pretty in that sharp-edged way that comes from expensive procedures and personal trainers. She treated me like an amusing pet Daniel had brought home. She'd make comments about my background, my clothes, my lack of connections, always with a laugh to make it seem like she was joking. "Oh, Amira, you're so authentic," she'd say after I'd worn the wrong dress to some charity function. "It's like you don't even try to fit in." How brave. But Daniel loved me, and I loved him, and I truly believed love would be enough. When we got married in the family's private chapel, surrounded by 500 of their closest friends and business associates, I felt like Cinderella. The fairy tale was complete. We were happy. God, we were so happy. Daniel never made me feel less than anything. He celebrated my work, encouraged my dreams, made me feel like marrying him was the best thing that had ever happened to both of us. When I got pregnant with the twins, he cried with joy. When I had complications and had to quit work early, he hired the best doctors money could buy and held my hand through every appointment. "You're giving me everything I never knew I wanted," he'd whisper at night, his hand on my growing belly. "I can't wait to see what kind of mother you'll be." The twins came early but healthy. Lucas and Leela, the lights of our lives. Daniel was the kind of father who changed diapers at 3 a.m. without complaining, who sang lullabys in his terrible singing voice, who took 1,000 photos a day. We had 6 perfect months as a family. Then the car accident happened on a Tuesday. Black ice, they said. Daniel's BMW sliding off the road on his way home from a board meeting, hitting a tree at 60 miles per hour. The hospital called me at 2:17 a.m. He died before I could get there. I was 26 years old, a widow with 6-month-old twins, and no idea that my real nightmare was just beginning. The funeral was everything you'd expect for a Harrington. Hundreds of mourners, flowers that cost more than most weddings, eulogies from city officials and business leaders. I sat in the front pew holding Lucas and Lila, trying not to fall apart completely while Daniel's family played the part of the grieving relatives. But I caught the looks they exchanged when they thought I wasn't watching. I heard Vivian whisper to Camille about taking care of the situation quickly. I saw Camille's husband make phone calls in the corner, his voice too low for me to hear, but his expression telling me everything I needed to know. After the service, after the burial, after the endless receiving line of condolences, we all returned to the Harrington mansion, the house where Daniel had grown up, where we'd spent holidays and family dinners, where I'd started to feel like I might actually belong. That's when everything changed. "Amira," Vivian said, her voice crisp and businesslike, "we need to discuss your living situation." I was exhausted, emotionally drained, still wearing my funeral dress with spit up on the shoulder from where Lila had been fussing. The twins were finally sleeping in their car seats, and all I wanted was to collapse in bed and figure out how to keep breathing without Daniel. "Living situation?" I asked, confused. "This house belongs to the Harrington family." Camille chimed in, her voice sharper than her mother's. "It always has. With Daniel gone, there's really no reason for you to stay here." The words hit me like a physical blow. This was the house where my husband had grown up, where we'd planned to raise our children, where every room held memories of the life we'd built together. "I don't understand," I said slowly. "This is our home, Daniel's and mine." "Daniel's gone," Vivian cut in, not cruelly, but with absolute finality. "And while we don't want to make this harder for you in a difficult moment, we do have to think practically about what comes next." "The estate is complex," Camille's husband added. He was an attorney corporate, not estates, but he spoke with the assurance of someone who'd already dug in. "There are family trusts, generational holdings. It's not as simple as everything passing to the surviving spouse." I stared at them, people I'd called family for 2 years, people who'd been in my living room hours ago, accepting condolences. Already, their grief was giving way to logistics, to quiet calculations about what my staying would cost them. "I need time to sort things out," I said at last. "The babies, the funeral expenses, Daniel's personal affairs." "Of course," Vivian replied, and for a brief second I thought she understood. "We're not monsters, Amira. We're not putting you out on the street tonight." She paused, and I should have recognized the turn coming. "But we'll need you out by the end of the week." Silence fell, broken only by the steady tick of the antique grandfather clock. Even the twins shifted in their car seats as if catching the tension. "By the end of the week," I echoed, certain I'd misheard. "It's more than generous," Camille said, folding her arms. "Most people would expect you to have made arrangements already. You've had time to think about this." "My husband died 4 days ago," I managed, my voice climbing despite my efforts to stay calm. I reminded myself they were Daniel's family, that they were mourning too. "I've been planning his funeral, not planning to be homeless." "Don't be dramatic," Vivian said with a dismissive wave of manicured fingers. "You're not going to be homeless. You're a young woman with a nursing degree. You'll figure something out." "And my children?" I asked, gesturing to the twins. "Daniel's children?" The glance that passed between Vivian and Camille told me everything about what they thought of my babies, of me, of where we stood in their world. "They'll be fine," Camille said, airy and cold. "Children adapt. It's probably better they grow up somewhere more appropriate to their circumstances." Appropriate to their circumstances. As if my babies were lesser because their mother hadn't been born into money. "Daniel would never want this," I said, desperation threading through my words. "He'd be horrified by how you're treating us." "Daniel isn't here," Vivian answered, ice settling back into her tone. "And he isn't coming back. What he would have wanted isn't the point now. What matters is what's best for the family." "We are his family," I said. "Lucas and Leela are his children." "You were his family," Camille corrected pointedly. Past tense. "Now you're a complication we need to resolve." The cruelty knocked the air from my lungs. 4 days since I'd lost the love of my life, and they were already writing us out. I had no fight left that night. The twins were stirring. Leela began to fuss in the way that meant she was hungry. I couldn't keep arguing with people who had clearly already decided. "I need to feed the babies," I said quietly. "Of course," Vivian replied, her voice softening just enough to acknowledge how hard she'd sounded. "Take the night. We can go over details tomorrow." I gathered the twins and went upstairs to the nursery. Daniel had painted himself, the mobile he'd painstakingly assembled turning slowly above. The rocking chair where he'd sung them to sleep every night. As I nursed Layla and held Lucas close, I tried to make sense of what I would do next. I had some savings, but not much. The life insurance policy was probably tied up in probate. I had no family of my own. My parents had died in an accident when I was 20, and Daniel had been my whole world. I'd quit my job when the pregnancy got complicated, and finding child care for twins on a nurse's salary would be nearly impossible. But I'd figure it out. I had to. For Lucas and Leela, I'd figure it out. What I didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Daniel had spent the last 3 years of his life planning for exactly this scenario. He'd seen how his family treated me. Even if I'd been too hopeful to recognize it fully, he'd known what they'd do if something happened to him. And he'd made sure they'd pay for every cruel word, every dismissive look, every moment they made me feel small. The will reading was scheduled for the following Friday, which gave me exactly the timeline Vivian had demanded for moving out. Perfect timing, I thought bitterly. They could get rid of me and then divide up Daniel's inheritance without having to look at the inconvenient reminder of his poor choices and wives. If you're enjoying this story so far, please hit that like button and subscribe. I share stories of resilience and justice every week, and I promise you're going to want to hear how this ends. Also, Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and if you've ever been in a situation where someone's true character was revealed during a crisis. But let me tell you what happened next, because the end of that week changed everything. The next morning, I woke up in Daniel's bed for what I thought would be the last time. The twins had kept me up most of the night. Lila was teething, and Lucas seemed to sense the tension in the house. I'd finally fallen asleep around 4 a.m., and when I opened my eyes at 7 o'clock, for just a moment I forgot Daniel was gone. I reached for him instinctively, my hand finding cold sheets instead of his warm body. That's when the reality hit me again. He was gone, and I had 4 days to figure out how to rebuild my entire life. I got the babies fed and dressed, trying to maintain some normalcy for their sake, when I heard voices downstairs, loud voices. I crept to the top of the staircase with Lucas on my hip, Lila in my arms, and listened. "Mother, we need to be smart about this," Camille was saying. "If we're too harsh, it could reflect poorly on the family. People will talk." "People are already talking," Vivian replied sharply. "About why Daniel married her in the first place. About what kind of mother she'd be. About whether those children even look like him." My blood ran cold. They were questioning my children's paternity. Daniel's children. "The important thing is that she signs whatever needs to be signed quickly and quietly," Camille's husband, Colin, added. "No lawyers, no complications, just a clean separation." "What if she fights it?" Camille asked. Vivian's laugh was cold. "With what? She has no money, no family, no connections. She's a nurse from nowhere who got lucky for a few years. Without Daniel, she's nothing. Without Daniel, she's nothing." The words hit me like a physical blow. Is that really what they thought of me? That I was just some gold digger who'd manipulated their precious Daniel into marriage? Lucas started to fuss, and I quickly carried both babies back to the nursery, my heart pounding. I sat in the rocking chair where Daniel used to sing to them, trying to process what I'd heard. They weren't just asking me to leave. They were actively planning to make sure I had no legal recourse, no way to fight back. I thought about Daniel, about the man who'd fallen in love with me, not despite my background, but because of who I was. He'd seen strength in me that I didn't even know I had. He'd seen potential that his family refused to recognize. "Your mother is the strongest person I know," he used to whisper to the babies when he thought I couldn't hear. "She's going to teach you both to stand up for what's right, no matter who tries to knock you down." But right now, I didn't feel strong. I felt lost and alone and completely out of my depth. Around noon, Vivian knocked on the nursery door. She entered without waiting for permission, dressed impeccably as always, carrying herself with the authority of someone who'd never been told no. "Amira, dear, we need to discuss the practical arrangements." I was changing Layla's diaper, trying to keep my hands steady. "What arrangements?" "For your departure, Colin has prepared some paperwork that will make things easier for everyone." She handed me a manila folder. Inside were legal documents. Quitclaim forms, custody agreements, financial releases. Pages and pages of legal language that basically amounted to me signing away any claim to anything connected to the Harrington family. "I don't understand," I said, scanning the papers. "Custody agreements. These are Daniel's children." "Of course they are," Vivian said smoothly. "No one's questioning that. But you have to understand, Amira, that raising children with Harrington blood comes with responsibilities you may not be equipped to handle." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that perhaps it would be in everyone's best interest, including the children's, if they remained connected to their father's family. If they had access to the resources and education and opportunities that the Harrington name provides." My hands started shaking. "You want to take my babies?" "Not take them," Vivian said as if the distinction mattered. "Share custody. We'd provide financial support, educational opportunities, social connections. They'd want for nothing except their mother. Vivian's expression hardened slightly. Their mother who can barely afford to feed them. Their mother who has no family support, no stable income, no way to provide the kind of life Daniel would have wanted for them. The manipulation was breathtaking. She was twisting my grief and fear into weapons against me, making me feel like wanting to keep my own children was somehow selfish. "I need time to think about this," I said finally. "Of course, but not too much time. The longer we wait, the more complicated things become." After she left, I sat in that nursery for hours, holding my babies and trying to figure out what Daniel would want me to do. I remembered conversations we'd had about his family, about their expectations and their blind spots. They think love is something you earn through performance. He told me once after a particularly tense family dinner, "They've never understood that real love is unconditional. That's why what we have scares them so much." He'd seen their flaws more clearly than I had. But he'd also loved them, believed they could change, hoped that our love would eventually win them over. He died believing his family would take care of us if something happened to him. He couldn't have imagined this. That afternoon, Camille appeared at the nursery door. She'd clearly been designated as the good cop in this operation. Her tone was gentler than her mother's, more sisterly. "Hey," she said, sitting in the window seat across from the rocking chair. "I know this is all overwhelming." I didn't respond, just continued rocking Lilo while Lucas played on the floor with his stuffed elephant. "A gift from Daniel just days before the accident. I want you to know that nobody wants to hurt you," Camille continued. "We all love Daniel and we know he loved you, but love doesn't solve everything. Amira, practical matters still have to be handled." "Practical matters," I repeated flatly. "You're 26 years old. You have your whole life ahead of you. But if you try to hold on to this life, Daniel's life, you'll end up resenting it. You'll end up resenting the children for tying you down when you should be out there building your own future." It was a masterful manipulation, taking my deepest fear about being a young single mother and weaponizing it against me, making me think that wanting to keep my family together was actually harmful to my children. "What if I don't sign the papers?" I asked. Camille's mask slipped just slightly. "Then things get complicated. Legal battles are expensive, Amira. They're also public. Do you really want Lucas and Leila growing up reading newspaper articles about their mother fighting their father's family for money? This isn't about money, isn't it?" Camille leaned forward. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're trying to hold on to a lifestyle you never earned. Daniel's dead, but you still want to live in his house, spend his money, claim his name. That's not grief, Amira. That's greed." The accusation stung because part of me wondered if she was right. Was I holding on too tightly to a life that had never really been mine? Was I being selfish by wanting my children to grow up in their father's house, surrounded by his things, his memories? But then Lucas looked up at me with Daniel's eyes, and Leila smiled with Daniel's dimple. And I remembered that this wasn't about me. This was about them, about making sure they knew they were wanted and loved and worthy of every opportunity. Not because of their last name, but because they were Daniel's children and mine. "I need to speak to a lawyer," I said finally. Camille's expression turned cold. "That would be unwise. Why? If everything you're asking is reasonable and legal, why would getting legal advice be unwise?" "Because lawyers complicate things. They turn simple family matters into battlegrounds. They cost money you don't have and time you can't afford to waste. Maybe I can't afford not to." Camille stood up, her pretense of sisterly concern completely gone now. "You really want to do this the hard way?" "I want to do this the right way." She walked to the door, then turned back. "You know, Daniel used to worry about this, about what would happen if you ever showed your true colors. He hoped love would be enough to change you, but deep down he knew what you really were." The lie was so breathtaking, so cruel, that for a moment I couldn't respond. Daniel had never said anything like that. Daniel had loved me completely, defended me to his family, built his entire future around our life together. But Camille had planted the seed of doubt expertly. In my grief and exhaustion, part of me wondered, what if Daniel had secretly worried about me? What if his family knew him better than I did? That's not true, I said quietly. Ask yourself this, Samira. If Daniel really trusted you completely, why didn't he make sure you were protected? Why didn't he update his will after the children were born? Why didn't he make provisions for exactly this situation? She left me alone with that question, and I hated that it burrowed into my mind like a parasite. Daniel had been young and healthy. We talked about updating our wills after the twins were born. But there had always been something more pressing, more immediate. New parents don't expect to become widows at 26. But what if Camille was right? What if Daniel's failure to protect us legally was actually a message about what he really thought of our future together? I was spiraling into doubt and self-incrimination when I heard a gentle knock on the door. I expected another family member coming to pressure me, but instead it was Mrs. Hahn, the housekeeper who'd worked for the Harringtons for 30 years. "Mrs. Harrington," she said softly. She was the only person in the house who still called me that. "May I come in?" I nodded and she closed the door behind her. Mrs. Hahn had always been kind to me, but we'd never had a personal conversation. She kept to herself, did her work efficiently, and treated everyone with polite distance. "I heard voices," she said carefully. "Raised voices. I wanted to make sure you and the babies were all right." "We're fine," I lied. She looked at me for a long moment, and I could see her weighing something in her mind. Finally, she sat down in the chair Camille had vacated. "Mrs. Harrington, I worked for Mr. Daniel's grandmother for 15 years before she passed. Then his mother, now 30 years total in this house. I've seen a lot of things." I waited, not sure where this was going. Mr. Daniel, he was different from the rest of them. Kinder, more like his grandmother. "She would have liked you very much." "Thank you, Mrs. Hahn. That's very kind." "Before he died, Mr. Daniel, he came to me. This was maybe 2 months ago when the babies were very small. He asked me something strange." My heart started beating faster. "What did he ask?" "He asked me what I thought would happen to you and the children if something happened to him. He said he was worried about his family, about how they would treat you. He said he was making arrangements to make sure you'd be taken care of, but he wanted to know if I thought you'd be safe here in the meantime." The room seemed to spin slightly. "He was making arrangements," Mrs. Hahn nodded. "He said he loved his family, but he wasn't blind to their faults. He said he needed to make sure his wife and children would be protected no matter what happened." "Did he say what kind of arrangements?" "No, but I know he met with lawyers several times. Not the family lawyers, different ones. And he spent a lot of time in his study working on papers, making phone calls." She stood up, smoothing her uniform. "I probably shouldn't have said anything, but seeing how they're treating you now, I thought you should know. Mr. Daniel loved you very much. Mrs. Harrington, whatever they're trying to make you believe about that, it's not true." After she left, I sat in stunned silence. Daniel had been making arrangements. He'd been worried about exactly this scenario, which meant the will reading on Friday might not go the way his family expected. But it also meant I had to survive until Friday. I had to endure 4 more days of their psychological warfare, their attempts to make me sign away my rights and my children's future. I had to hold on to my sanity and my strength long enough to find out what Daniel had really planned. That night at dinner, the first family dinner since the funeral, the temperature in the room could have frozen water. I sat at the long mahogany table where I'd shared so many meals with Daniel, where we'd announced our engagement, where we'd told his family about the pregnancy. But now I felt like an intruder, an unwelcome guest who'd overstayed her welcome. Vivian sat at the head of the table where Daniel used to sit, a pointed reminder of the new hierarchy. Camille and Colin flanked her, presenting a united front. I sat at the far end with Lila in a high chair and Lucas on my lap, trying to feed them while maintaining some dignity. "Have you had a chance to review the paperwork?" Colin asked, cutting into his steak with surgical precision. "Some of it," I replied carefully. And Vivian prompted, "A lot to take in. I think I need to consult with someone before I make any decisions." The silence that followed was heavy with disapproval. "Amira," Vivian said finally, "I hope you understand that we're trying to be generous here, but generosity has its limits." "What do you mean?" Camille leaned forward. "We mean that the offer on the table now, the shared custody arrangement, the financial support, the education trust for the children, these things aren't guaranteed to remain available if you choose to be difficult." "Difficult," I repeated. "You mean if I choose to get legal advice about my rights as Daniel's widow?" "You have no rights as Daniel's widow," Colin said bluntly. "Not to this house, not to the family assets, not to claim any inheritance beyond what's specifically designated in the will." "And what's specifically designated in the will?" Another heavy silence. "We'll find out on Friday," Vivian said finally. "But I think you'll find that Daniel's primary concern was protecting the family legacy, not enabling dependency. The cruelty of reducing my marriage to dependency took my breath away. But I was learning to recognize their tactics now. The way they used legal language to make cruelty sound reasonable. The way they twisted love into weakness and grief into greed. "I'm not dependent," I said quietly. "I'm his wife. I'm the mother of his children. That's not dependency. That's family, family," Camille scoffed. "You were married for 2 years, Amira. 2 years. Some of us have been Harringtons our entire lives. And your children," Vivian added, "they're half Harrington at best. They'll need guidance to understand their heritage, their responsibilities. They'll need to be shaped properly if they're going to carry the family name with dignity." The implication was clear. I wasn't capable of raising Harrington children properly. I was too common, too unsophisticated, too fundamentally different from their world. But what they didn't understand, what they couldn't understand, was that Daniel had fallen in love with those very differences. He'd chosen me not despite my background, but because of it. Because I represented something his family had lost along the way. Authenticity, compassion, the ability to love people for who they were rather than what they could provide. "Daniel loved me exactly as I am," I said firmly. "He chose me exactly as I am, and he chose to have children with me exactly as I am. If that's not good enough for this family, then maybe this family isn't good enough for us." The gasp from Vivian was audible. Camille's fork clattered against her plate. Colin looked like he was calculating how much this conversation would cost them in legal fees. "How dare you," Vivian said, her voice deadly quiet. "How dare you sit at this table in this house and insult this family? The family that welcomed you, that gave you opportunities you never could have imagined. That treated you like a daughter when you had nothing to offer in return." "I offered Daniel love," I said, standing up with Lucas still in my arms. "I offered him honesty and loyalty and partnership. I offered him children who will grow up knowing what real love looks like. If that's nothing to you, then we have nothing more to discuss." I gathered Leela from her high chair and walked out of that dining room with my head held high. Even though my knees were shaking, I could hear them talking in urgent whispers behind me. But I didn't look back. 3 more days. I just had to survive 3 more days. And then I'd know what Daniel had really planned for us. I'd know whether his love had been strong enough to protect us even after death. What I didn't know was that those 3 days would test every ounce of strength I had. And that the family I was fighting wasn't done showing me exactly how cruel people could be when they thought they held all the power. But I was about to learn something they'd forgotten in all their years of privilege and entitlement. Sometimes the people you underestimate the most are the ones who surprise you the most. And Daniel, my beautiful, brilliant Daniel, had been planning the biggest surprise of all. Wednesday morning brought the first real taste of what my life was going to look like if I didn't surrender completely. I woke up to find the house staff avoiding eye contact, their usual polite greetings replaced by uncomfortable silence. When I went to the kitchen to prepare the twins' bottles, I found the refrigerator nearly empty. "Mrs. Hahn," I called out, hoping she could explain what had happened to all the food. She appeared in the doorway, her expression apologetic, but her voice carefully neutral. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Harrington. Mrs. Vivian gave instructions about household expenses. She said to ask you about any special requests for groceries." The message was clear. I was no longer family. I was a guest whose welcome had expired, expected to provide for myself and my children while living under their roof. It was petty and calculated, designed to make me feel like a burden. But it also gave me my first real glimpse of what they were capable of when they wanted someone gone. I strapped the twins into their stroller and walked to the grocery store 6 blocks away, something I hadn't done since before Daniel died. The physical act of pushing the stroller, of choosing baby formula and diapers and food for myself, felt both liberating and terrifying. This was what my life would look like without the Harrington safety net. Ordinary, difficult, but mine. When I returned, Vivian was waiting in the foyer with a man I didn't recognize. Tall, thin, wearing an expensive suit. He had the predatory look of someone who made his living off other people's misfortune. "Amira, this is Edmund Slate," Vivian said, her tone falsely bright. "He's a family attorney specializing in estate matters. I thought it might be helpful for you to understand your legal position more clearly." I sat down the grocery bags, my heart rate spiking. They'd brought in reinforcements. I thought Colin was handling the legal matters. "Colin handles corporate law," Slate said, extending a manicured hand. "Estate law is much more specialized, particularly when it comes to protecting family assets from complications." The word complications hung in the air like a threat. I was the complication they needed to handle. "Mrs. Harrington," Slate continued, pulling out a leather portfolio. "I've reviewed your situation thoroughly, and I'm afraid there are some realities you need to understand about your husband's estate." He spread papers across the coffee table in the sitting room, the same room where Daniel had proposed 2 years earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me. Your husband's assets were largely held in family trusts established decades ago. These trusts have very specific provisions about inheritance, designed to protect the family's wealth across generations. I sat down across from him, Lila on my lap and Lucas playing quietly on the floor. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means that while you may have certain rights as his widow, those rights are limited by the trust structures. The house, for instance, belongs to the Harrington Family Trust, not to any individual. Your husband had the right to live here, but not to transfer ownership." My stomach dropped. So even if Daniel left me something in his will, the will can only dispose of assets he actually owned, and I'm afraid that's a much smaller portion of what you might have assumed belonged to him. Vivian was watching my face carefully, gauging my reaction. She wanted to see me break, wanted to watch hope drain from my eyes. "What about life insurance?" I asked. "What about his personal accounts?" "Life insurance policies are typically structured to avoid estate taxes," Slate said smoothly. "They often go directly to trust beneficiaries rather than individual heirs. As for personal accounts, well, we'll know more after Friday's will reading, but I want to manage your expectations appropriately." The legal language was designed to confuse me, but the message was clear. I should expect nothing. Daniel's family had structured their wealth specifically to prevent situations like mine. "What about my children?" I asked. "They're his biological children. They're Harringtons." Slate exchanged a look with Vivian. "Children's rights are protected under law, of course, but those rights typically involve reasonable support, not inheritance of family assets." And determining what constitutes reasonable support can be subjective. Subjective meaning what? Meaning that a child's needs are different depending on their circumstances. A child being raised by a single mother of modest means has different requirements than a child being raised within the family structure, with access to private education, family connections, and generational wealth. I felt like I was drowning. They were systematically destroying every assumption I'd had about my children's security, about Daniel's ability to protect us, about my rights as his wife. I think you should also understand, Vivian added gently, that prolonged legal battles can be very expensive and very public. The media loves stories about young widows fighting wealthy families. It can get quite ugly. The threat was barely disguised. Fight us and we'll destroy your reputation along with your finances. Of course, Slate added, if you're willing to work with the family on a reasonable settlement. These complications can be avoided entirely. Mrs. Vivian and Mrs. Camille have already outlined a very generous arrangement. That would provide for you and the children while respecting the family's legitimate interests. Generous, I repeated flatly. Shared custody ensures the children maintain their connection to the Harrington legacy. Financial support ensures you can rebuild your life without the stress of providing for them entirely on your own. And a clean separation prevents any unpleasantness that might affect the children later. They had it all figured out. They'd take my children for half the year, turn them into proper Harringtons, and send me enough money to keep quiet about it. I'd be relegated to the role of the birth mother who'd served her purpose and could now be managed from a distance. And if I refuse, I asked, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10. Well, Slate said, closing his portfolio, that would be unfortunate for everyone involved. Legal battles over estate matters can take years to resolve. During that time, assets remain frozen, support payments are delayed, and children grow up in an atmosphere of conflict rather than stability. What he's trying to say, Vivian said, her mask of politeness slipping slightly, is that fighting this will hurt Lucas and Leela more than anyone else? Is your pride really worth putting them through that? It was masterful manipulation, turning my love for my children into a weapon against me. They were making me choose between fighting for our rights and protecting my babies from a prolonged battle. But something Mrs. Hahn had said kept echoing in my mind. Daniel had been worried about this exact scenario. He'd met with lawyers, made arrangements. If he'd anticipated his family's behavior this clearly, surely he'd taken steps to protect us. I need to think about this, I said finally. Slate stood, straightening his tie. Of course, but I hope you won't think too long. Opportunities like this don't remain available indefinitely. After they left, I sat in that sitting room holding my children and trying to process what had just happened. They'd brought in a hired gun to intimidate me, to make me believe that Daniel's love hadn't been enough to protect us legally. But something felt wrong about Slate's presentation. His explanations were too smooth, too practiced. He'd presented complex legal concepts with the confidence of someone who'd given this exact speech before, to other inconvenient widows who needed to be managed. That afternoon, while the twins napped, I did something I probably should have done days earlier. I called Daniel's best friend, Julian Bennett, the man my son was named after. Julian had been Daniel's roommate in college, his best man at our wedding, and one of the few people who'd always treated me like family rather than an interloper. Amira, he said when he heard my voice, God, I've been thinking about you constantly. How are you holding up? The genuine warmth in his voice almost broke me. It had been so long since someone had spoken to me with simple kindness. I've been better, I admitted. Julian, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Of course, anything. Did Daniel ever talk to you about his family? About what might happen to me and the children if something happened to him? There was a long pause. Why are you asking? Because they want me out of the house by Friday. They're questioning my rights to anything, even reasonable support for the children. They've brought in lawyers to explain why I should expect nothing and be grateful for whatever scraps they're willing to throw me. Jesus, Julian breathed. I was afraid of this. Afraid of what? Amira. Daniel loved his family, but he wasn't blind to their flaws. He knew how they really felt about you, even if he hoped they'd change. About 6 months ago, maybe longer, he started asking me about estate attorneys. Good ones, not the family lawyers. My heart started racing. Did he hire someone? I gave him several names. I know he met with at least 2 of them. He was very secretive about it, but he said he needed to make sure you and the kids would be protected no matter what happened. Protected how? I don't know the specifics. Daniel played his cards close to the vest when it came to family business, but I know he was working on something big. The will reading is Friday, I said. Then Friday, you'll get your answers. But Amira, listen to me. Don't sign anything before then. Whatever they're pressuring you to sign, whatever threats they're making, just hold on until Friday. What if they're right? What if Daniel didn't actually own as much as I thought? What if the family trust controls everything? Julian was quiet for a moment. The Daniel I knew wouldn't have married you and had children with you without making sure you'd be taken care of. He loved you too much to leave you vulnerable. After I hung up, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Daniel died. Hope, not the desperate hope of someone grasping at straws, but real hope based on evidence. Daniel had been planning something. Multiple people had confirmed it, but hope also made the waiting harder. That evening, Camille appeared at the twins' bedtime with what she called a peace offering. Expensive baby clothes, designer toys, the kind of gifts that came with strings attached. I know things have been tense, she said, settling into the nursery's window seat while I changed Lila into pajamas. I want you to know that nobody wants to be the villain here. Then stop acting like villains, I replied, not looking at her. We're trying to protect everyone, including you. You're young, Amira. You have your whole life ahead of you. But if you spend the next decade fighting legal battles and raising children you can't afford to provide for properly, you'll end up bitter and resentful. You keep saying I can't afford to provide for them properly. What makes you so sure of that? Camille's smile was pitying because Daniel's life insurance policy is worth $200,000. That sounds like a lot. But split between you and 2 children after taxes, after legal fees if you choose to fight this, you're looking at maybe $100,000 to start over completely. 200,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. Daniel had been worth millions. At least I thought he was. We'd lived in a multi-million-dollar house, driven expensive cars, donated tens of thousands to charity every year. How was his life insurance only $200,000? I can see you're surprised, Camille continued. The truth is, most of Daniel's wealth was tied up in family structures he couldn't access directly. He lived well because the family trust provided for him, but his personal assets were much more limited. She was feeding me information designed to break my spirit, to make me believe that fighting for my children's inheritance was pointless because there was nothing to inherit. The generous thing for us to do would be to walk away and let you figure it out on your own, Camille said. But we're not going to do that because we love Lucas and Lila, their family, even if their circumstances have changed. Their circumstances, I repeated. They're half orphans being raised by a single mother with no family money and limited earning potential. That's not their fault, but it is their reality. We can change that reality by sharing custody and providing them with opportunities you simply can't match. The offer was seductive in its logic. My children could have the best of both worlds. A mother who loved them unconditionally and a family with the resources to give them every advantage. All I had to do was admit that I wasn't enough on my own. But something about Camille's presentation bothered me. She was too confident, too prepared. Like Slate, she was delivering talking points rather than having a genuine conversation. What if I said no? I asked. What if I wanted to keep my children with me full-time and figure out how to provide for them myself? Camille's mask slipped just slightly. Then you'd be putting your pride ahead of their welfare. And family courts don't look kindly on mothers who make decisions based on emotion rather than what's best for the children. There it was, the final threat. If I didn't cooperate, they'd fight me for custody in court. They'd use their money and connections to paint me as an unfit mother who was too selfish to do what was best for her children. You have until tomorrow night to make a decision, Camille said, standing up. After that, the offers come off the table, and we handle this through official channels. She left me alone with the twins. And for the first time since Daniel died, I let myself cry. Not the dignified tears of a grieving widow, but the desperate sobs of a woman who was completely out of options. Or so I thought. Because what I didn't know was that Daniel's arrangements weren't just about money. They were about justice. And Friday's will reading was going to reveal just how well my husband had known the people he called family and just how thoroughly he'd planned for their true nature to be exposed. The woman they thought they could intimidate into submission was about to inherit something far more powerful than money. She was about to inherit the truth, and the truth, as they were about to discover, had a way of changing everything. Thursday morning arrived with the weight of finality. One more day until the will reading. One more day until I'd either discover that Daniel had protected us, or learn that my children and I were truly on our own. I woke up feeling like I was standing at the edge of a cliff and everyone around me was deciding whether to pull me back or push me over. The first sign that something had changed came when I went downstairs for breakfast. The dining room table was set for 4 adults instead of the usual family arrangement. And there was a woman I'd never seen before sitting across from Vivian drinking coffee and taking notes. "Amira," Vivian said, her tone artificially bright. "Perfect timing. I'd like you to meet Dr. Serena Mercer. She's a child psychologist who specializes in family transitions." My blood went cold. They'd brought in a psychologist not for grief counseling, not to help the twins process their father's death, but to evaluate whether I was fit to parent them during this difficult transition. Dr. Mercer stood and extended her hand. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe mid-30s, with the kind of polished appearance that screamed expensive education and corporate clients. Her handshake was firm, her smile professional and completely cold. "Mrs. Harrington, I'm so sorry for your loss. I understand this has been an incredibly difficult time for your family. Thank you." I managed, settling Leela into her high chair while keeping Lucas close to my side. Every maternal instinct I had was screaming danger. Dr. Mercer has worked with many families navigating complex custody arrangements, Camille added, appearing in the doorway with her own coffee. We thought it might be helpful to get a professional perspective on what's best for Lucas and Lila during this transition. Transition to what exactly? I asked. To their new reality, Dr. Mercer said, pulling out a tablet and stylus. Losing a parent is traumatic for children, even ones as young as yours. The key is maintaining stability and ensuring their emotional needs are being met consistently. She was already taking notes, already observing how I interacted with my children, already building whatever case they'd hired her to build. Of course, the challenge with such young children is that they can't articulate their needs directly, she continued. We have to rely on behavioral indicators and environmental assessments to determine what arrangement serves their best interests. Environmental assessments. She was evaluating whether I could provide a suitable environment for my own children. I'd like to spend some time observing you with Lucas and Lila today, if that's all right. Nothing formal, just getting a sense of the family dynamic. It wasn't a request. It was an ultimatum disguised as professional courtesy. Refuse, and they'd use that refusal against me in court. Of course, I said, forcing a smile. "We'd be happy to spend time with you." The rest of the morning was a nightmare of artificial normalcy. Dr. Mercer followed us around like a shadow, watching how I fed the twins, changed their diapers, responded to their cries, played with them during tummy time. She made notes constantly, her expression neutral, but her pen moving in ways that made my stomach churn. "Tell me about your support system," she said, while I was giving Lila a bottle. "Besides the Harrington family, who do you rely on for help with child care?" "I don't need help with child care," I replied. "I'm their mother, of course, but all mothers need support. Friends, family members, neighbors who can step in during emergencies." "What does that network look like for you?" It was a trap disguised as a reasonable question. My parents were dead. I had a few friends from nursing school, but we'd lost touch after I got married and moved into Daniel's world. My support system was Daniel, and Daniel was gone. I'm still figuring that out. I admitted more notes, more evidence that I was isolated, unprepared for single motherhood. "What about financial planning? Have you given thought to child care arrangements when you return to work?" "I haven't decided when I'm returning to work, but you will need to work presumably. The children will need financial support, health care, educational planning. Have you researched daycare options in your price range?" Each question was designed to highlight my vulnerabilities, to build a case that I was unprepared for the realities of raising 2 children alone. And the worst part was that some of her concerns were legitimate. I hadn't thought about daycare. I hadn't researched healthcare options. I'd been so focused on grieving Daniel and surviving his family's psychological assault that I hadn't planned for the practical aspects of my new life. "Mrs. Harrington," Dr. Mercer said gently, "I can see that you love Lucas and Lila very much. That's never been in question. But love alone isn't always enough to provide children with everything they need. What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is acknowledge when they need help. The Harrington family has resources that could benefit the children. Educational opportunities, social connections, financial stability. Shared custody doesn't mean you love them less. It means you love them enough to want what's best for them." It was Camille's argument delivered with professional authority. I was being manipulated by an expert now, someone trained in the psychology of persuasion and family dynamics. But I'd also spent 2 years as a pediatric nurse. I'd seen real child welfare cases, real situations where children needed protection from inadequate parents. This wasn't that. This was a wealthy family using professional credentials to steal children from a mother whose only crime was not being born into money. "Dr. Mercer," I said carefully, "how long have you worked with the Harrington family?" "This is my first consultation with them, but I've worked with similar families in comparable situations." "Comparable situations meaning what?" She paused, clearly realizing she'd revealed more than intended. "Situations where family wealth and custody issues intersect in complex ways." "How many of those situations resulted in the birth mother maintaining primary custody?" Another pause, longer this time. "Every situation is unique, Mrs. Harrington. I don't think statistics are helpful here." But her non-answer was an answer. She was a hired gun brought in to provide professional cover for a predetermined outcome. The Harringtons had probably paid her to rubber stamp their custody grab with psychological legitimacy. That afternoon, while Dr. Mercer was supposedly reviewing her notes, Mrs. Hahn found me in the nursery. "Mrs. Harrington," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something." I looked up from where I was folding baby clothes. The endless task of keeping up with twins' laundry that had become a meditation in this house of psychological warfare. "I heard them talking," she continued. "Mrs. Vivian and the doctor. They were discussing her report." "What did they say?" "The doctor was asking about payment arrangements. Mrs. Vivian said her fee would be doubled if the report was ready before the will reading tomorrow." My heart sank. They were rushing the psychological evaluation to have ammunition for tomorrow's meeting. They wanted Dr. Mercer's professional opinion that shared custody was in the children's best interest as backup in case Daniel's will didn't go their way. "There's something else," Mrs. said. "Mrs. Vivian made a phone call this morning to someone called Margaret. She said, 'Make sure the judge understands our position before Friday. We can't afford any surprises.'" A judge? They were already positioning themselves with a family court judge, laying groundwork for a custody battle before I'd even decided to fight. "Mrs. Hahn, why are you telling me this?" She was quiet for a moment, looking at Lucas as he played with his blocks on the floor. "Because 30 years ago, I watched this family destroy another young woman who got in their way. Daniel's father had a secretary who got pregnant. Beautiful girl, very kind. The family made sure she lost custody of her child and disappeared from the city completely. The room felt like it was spinning. What happened to the child? Raised by distant relatives of the father. Given the Harrington name, but never acknowledged publicly. I heard he lives in Europe now. Never speaks to the family. They'd done this before. They'd systematically destroyed a woman and stolen her child to protect their reputation and control their legacy. And now they were doing it to me. Why didn't you ever tell Daniel about this?" I tried once. He was maybe 16, asking questions about his half-brother. Mrs. Vivian heard me talking to him and made it very clear that I would be terminated immediately if I ever brought it up again. I needed this job, Mrs. Harrington. I had my own family to support. I didn't blame her. Vivian Harrington was the kind of woman who could destroy lives with a phone call, who could make sure Mrs. Hahn never worked in this city again if she chose to. But the revelation changed everything. This wasn't just about money or property or even custody. This was about a pattern of behavior, a family that eliminated obstacles to their control with surgical precision. That evening, Dr. Mercer presented her preliminary findings over dinner. The twins were upstairs sleeping, and I sat at the formal dining table feeling like I was on trial. Based on my observations today, she began reading from her tablet. "I have some concerns about the current arrangement. Here it comes. I thought Mrs. Harrington is clearly devoted to her children and provides adequate basic care. However, the stress of recent events has created an environment that may not be optimal for infant development." "What kind of stress?" Vivian asked as if she hadn't done the primary source of that stress. "Financial uncertainty, social isolation, and grief-related depression can all impact a mother's ability to provide consistent, emotional regulation for young children. The twins have been more fussy than typical, which may indicate they're responding to environmental tension. Layla had been fussy because she was teething. Lucas had been crying more because he missed his father's voice, his bedtime songs, his gentle presence. But Dr. Mercer was reframing normal infant behavior as evidence of my inadequacy. "What would you recommend?" Camille asked. "Ideally, a gradual transition to shared custody that allows the children to maintain their connection to both their mother and their extended family support system. Starting with regular visits and building toward a more structured arrangement as everyone adjusts. And if Mrs. Harrington refuses to consider shared custody?" Colin asked. Dr. Mercer's expression grew serious. "Then I would have significant concerns about her ability to prioritize the children's needs over her own emotional attachments. Refusing help when it's clearly needed could be seen as a form of emotional neglect." There it was. If I fought for my children, I'd be painted as emotionally unstable and neglectful. If I agreed to shared custody, I'd be validating their claim that I wasn't capable of raising them alone. "I'd like to see your notes," I said quietly. "I'm sorry." Your professional notes from today. If you're making recommendations that could affect my custody of my children, I have a right to see the evidence you're basing those recommendations on. Dr. Mercer glanced at Vivian, who nodded slightly. "Of course, I'll have a copy prepared for you tomorrow." "Tomorrow? After the will reading?" after whatever decision was made about my future had already been reached. "I'd like to see them tonight." I pressed. "Mrs. Harrington," Vivian said, her voice sharp, "Dr. Mercer is doing us a favor by expediting this evaluation. I think we can allow her to complete her work professionally." The message was clear. I had no power here. I was a subject of their evaluation, not a participant in determining my children's future. After Dr. Mercer left presumably to write a report recommending that my children be taken from me, I sat in Daniel's study trying to process what had happened. In one day, they'd brought in professional reinforcement for their custody claim, revealed that they'd done this before to another woman, and positioned themselves with a judge for whatever legal battle might come. But tomorrow was the will reading. Tomorrow, I'd finally know whether Daniel had seen this coming, whether his love had been strong enough to protect us even from his own family. I found myself staring at the family photos on Daniel's desk. Our wedding day, the twins' first Christmas, casual moments of happiness that felt like they'd happened to someone else. In every picture, Daniel was looking at me or the children with such love, such pride, such fierce protectiveness. He'd known his family better than I had. He'd worried about this exact scenario. Surely he'd found a way to prevent it. But as I looked around his study at the law books and business journals and family photographs going back generations, I felt the weight of what I was up against. This wasn't just Vivian and Camille. This was an entire system built to protect Harrington interests with lawyers and judges and professionals, all working to maintain the status quo. One more night. I just had to survive one more night, and then I'd know whether the man I'd loved and married had left me the tools to fight back or whether I was truly as powerless as his family wanted me to believe. What I didn't know was that Daniel hadn't just planned for their cruelty. He documented it, and tomorrow's will reading wasn't just going to reveal his financial arrangements. It was going to expose 30 years of the Harrington family's darkest secrets with me, as the key witness they'd never seen coming. The woman they thought they could intimidate into silence was about to become the voice of everyone they'd ever tried to destroy. And the empire they'd built on manipulation and control was about to crumble around them. Thursday night, the last night I would ever sleep in the bed I'd shared with Daniel. The last night I would wake up in the house where we'd planned our future, where we'd brought our babies home from the hospital, where we dreamed about growing old together. But I wasn't sleeping. I was staring at the ceiling, holding Lila while Lucas slept in his crib, trying to prepare myself for whatever tomorrow would bring. The will reading was at 10 a.m. by noon. I'd either have the tools to fight back, or I'd be facing the complete destruction of everything I'd thought my life would be. At 2:17 a.m., I remember the exact time because it was when the hospital had called to tell me Daniel was gone. I heard footsteps in the hallway. Soft, careful footsteps that stopped outside my door. My heart started racing. Was someone trying to get in? Were they coming to take the babies in the middle of the night? Then I heard the soft knock. "Mrs. Harrington, it's Mrs. Hahn. I need to speak with you." I wrapped Leela in her blanket and opened the door. Mrs. Hahn stood in the hallway in her nightgown and robe. Her usually perfect composure cracked with urgency. "What's wrong?" I whispered. "They're moving faster than I thought. Mrs. Vivian made more phone calls after you went to bed." I heard her talking to someone about emergency custody orders. The bottom dropped out of my world. Emergency custody orders. If the will reading doesn't go the way they want tomorrow, they're prepared to claim you're mentally unstable. Dr. Mercer's report, combined with testimony about your erratic behavior since Daniel died, could be enough to get temporary custody while a full evaluation is conducted. I leaned against the doorframe, Leela still in my arms, trying to process what she was telling me. They weren't just planning to fight me for custody eventually. They were planning to take my children tomorrow if Daniel's will didn't give them what they wanted. "There's more," Mrs. Hahn said. "I found papers in Mrs. Vivian's study. Custody petitions already filled out. Psychological evaluation requests. Placement orders for the children. Placement orders. Temporary guardianship papers naming Camille and Colin as emergency caregivers. Everything's already prepared. They just need Dr. Mercer's report and a judge's signature. I felt physically sick while I'd been mourning my husband and trying to process their financial manipulations. They'd been building a complete legal case to steal my children. "Why are you helping me?" I asked. "You could lose your job. You could lose everything." Mrs. Hahn was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was heavy with old pain. "Because 30 years ago, I watched them destroy Elena Prescott and take her son away. I was young then, afraid to speak up, afraid to lose my position. I've lived with that guilt every day since." "What exactly happened to her?" "She was Mr. Daniel's father's personal assistant. Beautiful, intelligent, from a good middle-class family. When she got pregnant, he promised to marry her, to take care of her and the child. But when Mrs. Vivian found out, everything changed. Mrs. Hahn led me into Daniel's study and closed the door behind us. In the moonlight streaming through the windows, the room felt haunted by all the secrets it had witnessed. They made Elena's life impossible, questioned her mental stability, spread rumors about her character, had her followed by private investigators. When little Ethan was born, they waited exactly 6 weeks, then filed for emergency custody. On what grounds? Postpartum depression, financial instability, lack of family support. They had doctors testify that she was unfit, that the stress of single motherhood was making her unstable. The judge awarded temporary custody to Mr. Daniel's father, supposedly until Elena could get back on her feet. My blood ran cold. Supposedly, the temporary custody became permanent when Elena couldn't afford to fight the family lawyers anymore. She was allowed supervised visits for a while. Then those were reduced to letters. Eventually, even the letters stopped coming. What happened to Ethan? Raised by distant relatives in Switzerland. Given a generous trust fund, but no real connection to his father or the family. He's a successful banker now, I hear, but he's never returned to America. Never tried to contact his mother. And Elena, Mrs. Hahn's voice broke slightly. She left the city after the custody case was finalized. I heard she moved to California, tried to start over. She died in a car accident about 10 years ago. Ethan never knew. The story hit me like a physical blow. They'd done this before successfully. They'd taken a child from his mother and destroyed her life so completely that she died alone. Separated from her son forever, Mrs. Hahn. I need you to tell me everything you know about Daniel's legal meetings. Everything? She nodded and sat down across from Daniel's desk. He started meeting with lawyers about 8 months ago, right after the twins were born. Not the family lawyers, independent attorneys who specialized in estate planning and family law. He was very secretive about it, but I managed the household calendars, so I knew when he was out and when he said he'd be back. How many meetings? At least 6 that I know of. Sometimes he'd be gone for hours. When he came back, he'd go straight to the study and work with papers he kept in a locked drawer. She gestured to Daniel's desk. He also had the house wired. Wired how? Security cameras, but not the obvious kind. Hidden ones in the living areas, the dining room, anywhere the family gathered. He said it was for insurance purposes, but I think he was documenting conversations. My heart started racing. Are those cameras still active? As far as I know, the security system is controlled from the basement office. Mr. Daniel showed me once in case there was ever an emergency. If the cameras were still recording, they would have captured everything from the past week. Vivian's threats, Camille's manipulations, Dr. Mercer's biased evaluation, everything. Mrs. Hahn. I need to see those recordings, Mrs. Harrington. If they catch us, if I don't fight back, they're going to take my children tomorrow. I have nothing left to lose. She studied my face in the moonlight, and I could see her making the same calculation she'd failed to make 30 years ago. The choice between safety and doing what was right. The basement office is next to the wine cellar, she said finally. The security system password is Lila Lucas, 1015, the twins' names and their birth date. I hugged her. This woman who'd found the courage to risk everything for a second chance at justice. There's one more thing, she said as I was about to leave. Mr. Daniel made me promise something before he died. He made me promise that if anything ever happened to him, I would make sure you knew how much he loved you. He said his family would try to make you doubt that, try to make you believe he didn't trust you completely. But he did. Everything he did was to protect you and the children. Tears started flowing down my cheeks. After a week of being told I was nothing without Daniel, that he'd failed to protect me, that our love hadn't been enough. Hearing those words was like finding water in a desert. I put Lila back in her crib and crept downstairs to the basement. The house was completely silent, but every creak of the floorboards sounded like thunder in my ears. If they caught me accessing Daniel's security system, it would be all the evidence they needed to claim I was mentally unstable and violating their privacy. The basement office was exactly where Mrs. Hahn had said it would be. A small windowless room with computer equipment, filing cabinets, and monitors showing feeds from cameras throughout the house. I entered the password with shaking fingers. Lila Lucas 1015. The system unlocked immediately. For the next 3 hours, I watched my life from Daniel's hidden cameras. I saw myself in the days after his funeral, numb with grief, but trying to hold everything together for the twins. I saw Vivian's calculated cruelty, Camille's manipulation, Colin's legal intimidation. I saw Dr. Mercer coaching her questions to get specific responses. Saw her taking payments and discussing predetermined conclusions. But most devastating of all, I saw conversations between Vivian and Camille that revealed the true scope of their plans. "She's weaker than Elena was," Vivian said in one recording from Tuesday night. "Elena had some fight in her. This one just cries and hopes someone will save her." "The timing is perfect," Camille replied. "Daniel's dead. She's isolated, and she has no idea what's coming. By the time she realizes what's happening, we'll already have the children. Dr. Mercer's report will be crucial. We need her to document instability, depression, inability to provide adequate care. What if Amira surprises us? What if she's stronger than we think?" Vivian's laugh was cold and dismissive. "Then we destroy her the same way we destroyed Elena. We have the money, the connections, the legal expertise. She has nothing but sentiment and desperation. And if she tries to fight dirty, if she goes to the media or tries to expose family business, then we make sure she's discredited before anyone takes her seriously. Mental health commitments are surprisingly easy to arrange when you know the right doctors. Mental health commitments. They were prepared to have me institutionalized if I became too much of a problem. I kept watching, and the recordings got worse. Conversations about bribing judges, about manipulating custody evaluations, about ensuring I'd never see my children again once they had legal control. But the most chilling conversation happened just yesterday after Dr. Mercer left. "What if Daniels will surprise us?" Camille asked. "What if he actually left her something substantial?" "Impossible." Vivian replied. "I had Edmund review all the family trust documents. Daniel had no independent assets worth mentioning, the life insurance, maybe some personal accounts, but nothing that would give her real power. But what if Camille listened to me? Even if Daniel left her every penny he actually owned, it wouldn't be enough to fight us in court. We control the family trusts, the business interests, the real wealth. She's fighting with a water gun against an army. And the children will be raised as proper Harringtons, with appropriate values and connections. In 5 years, they won't even remember her clearly. Children adapt quickly when they're properly guided. I had to stop the recording and run to the bathroom to throw up. They were planning to erase me from my children's lives so completely that Lucas and Lila would grow up thinking I'd abandoned them. But I also realized something else from watching those recordings. They were scared of something. There was an underlying tension in their conversations, a fear they were trying to hide even from each other. They were moving fast, taking risks because they were afraid of something they didn't want to acknowledge. They were scared of what Daniel might have done. I spent the rest of the night copying the recordings to multiple drives, documenting everything they'd said and done since the funeral. If nothing else, I'd have evidence of their conspiracy to steal my children. But more than that, I finally understood the full scope of what I was fighting. This wasn't just about money or custody or even the children's futures. This was about power, about a family that had built their empire by destroying anyone who threatened their control. They'd done it to Elena Prescott 30 years ago. They were doing it to me now. And they'd keep doing it to anyone who got in their way until someone finally stopped them. As the sun rose on Friday morning, the day of the will reading, I sat in Daniel's chair holding printed copies of conversations that revealed the Harrington family's true nature. I had evidence of their conspiracy, their bribery, their plans to steal my children and destroy my life. But I also had something else. I had Mrs. Hahn's courage, Elena Prescott's story, and 30 years of buried secrets that were about to see daylight. The woman they thought they could intimidate into submission had spent the night gathering ammunition. And in a few hours, when Daniel's lawyer read his will, they were going to discover that the man they'd underestimated in life had left them the fight of their lives and death. But first, they had to get through the morning. And as I watched Vivian come down for breakfast, already dressed for victory, I realized that the next few hours would determine not just my future and my children's future, but whether 30 years of injustice would finally face consequences. The will reading was in 4 hours. I had evidence that could destroy them. And somewhere in Daniel's carefully planned arrangements was the key to everything. I just had to survive long enough to use it. Friday morning arrived with the weight of Judgment Day. I'd been awake for over 24 hours, running on adrenaline and desperation, clutching the evidence of the Harrington family's conspiracy like a lifeline. The will reading was at 10 a.m. It was 6:30, and I could hear movement downstairs. The family preparing for what they thought would be their final victory. I fed the twins, changed them, dressed them in the outfits Daniel had bought them just weeks before he died. If this was going to be our last morning together in this house, possibly our last morning together at all, I wanted them to look like the precious love children they were. Lila kept reaching for the window, babbling at the morning light, and Lucas was fascinated by the dust motes floating in the sunbeam. They had no idea their entire world was about to change. They trusted me to protect them, and I was terrified I was about to fail them completely. At 7:00 a.m., there was a knock on the door. Not a soft knock like Mrs. Hahn's midnight visit, but an authoritative pounding that made both twins jump. Mrs. Harrington, Vivian's voice called through the door. "We need to speak with you immediately." I opened the door to find not just Vivian, but Camille Collin, Dr. Mercer, and 2 people I'd never seen before. A middle-aged woman in a business suit and a younger man with the unmistakable bearing of law enforcement. "This is Lauren Pierce from Child Protective Services," Vivian said without preamble. "And Officer Alvarez, we need to discuss the children's immediate welfare." My legs went weak. Child Protective Services. They'd called CPS on me. "I don't understand," I said, though I understood perfectly. This was their nuclear option, their way of taking the children before the will reading could complicate their plans. "Mrs. Harrington," Lauren Pierce said, her tone professional but not unkind, "we've received reports of concerning behavior that may indicate the children are at risk. We need to conduct an immediate welfare check." "What reports?" Dr. Mercer stepped forward with her tablet. "Based on my psychological evaluation, I have serious concerns about your mental state and your ability to provide adequate care for Lucas and Lila. What specific concerns? Erratic emotional responses. Inability to make rational decisions regarding the children's welfare. Refusal to accept help from family support systems. And signs of severe depression that could lead to neglect or worse. Each word was carefully chosen, designed to sound professional while painting me as mentally unstable. I could see Officer Alvarez's hand resting casually on his radio, ready to call for backup if I became agitated. I want to see the formal complaint, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Lauren Pierce pulled out a folder. The complaint was filed yesterday evening by concerned family members who've observed deteriorating conditions and behavior patterns consistent with severe psychological distress. I scanned the document and my heart sank. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. Half-truths twisted into evidence of instability. My tears at Daniel's funeral became uncontrollable emotional outbursts. My insistence on keeping the children with me became obsessive attachment, preventing proper social development. My refusal to sign their custody papers became inability to make rational decisions. Regarding children's welfare, Mrs. Harrington, Officer Alvarez said gently, "We're not here to take your children away. We just need to ensure they're safe while these concerns are properly evaluated." Safe from what? From their mother who loves them. From a potentially unstable situation, Dr. Mercer interjected. The children have been exhibiting signs of stress, crying more frequently, disrupted sleep patterns, feeding difficulties. These can be indicators that their environment isn't conducive to healthy development. Lila had been teething. Lucas had been missing his father, but they were turning normal infant behavior into evidence against me. "I want a lawyer," I said. "Of course," Colin replied smoothly. "But in the meantime, the children's immediate safety is our primary concern. The court has issued a temporary protective order placing Lucas and Lila in emergency foster care pending a full evaluation." Emergency foster care. They were taking my children right now before I had a chance to fight before the will reading could reveal whatever Daniel had planned. Foster care with whom? I asked, though I already knew the answer. With Mrs. Camille Harrington and her husband Colin, Lauren Pierce said as family members. They're the preferred placement for maintaining stability and family connections. Camille had legally changed her last name back to Prescott for this. They'd planned every detail. "This is insane," I said, my voice rising. "You can't just take children from their mother because she's grieving her husband's death." "Mrs. Harrington," Officer Alvarez said, his tone shifting slightly, "I need you to remain calm. Getting agitated will only make this more difficult for everyone, especially the children." The threat was clear. Any emotional response to having my children stolen would be used as evidence of my instability. "Can I pack their things?" "We've already prepared appropriate supplies," Camille said. And I noticed for the first time that she was carrying a diaper bag and had car seats waiting in the hallway. Everything they need for the next few days. The next few days. As if this was temporary. As if they had any intention of giving my children back. I knelt down next to Lila's high chair and Lucas' play area, trying to memorize their faces, their sounds, the way Lila's hair curled behind her ears, and Lucas' dimple showed when he smiled. I kissed their foreheads, breathed in their baby smell, whispered that Mommy loved them more than anything in the world. "Time to go," Dr. Mercer said after what felt like seconds, but was probably several minutes. "Can I come with them? Can I see where they're being taken?" "That wouldn't be advisable." Lauren Pierce said, "Transitions are easier when they're clean breaks. You'll be able to arrange supervised visitation through the court system." Supervised visitation with my own children. Children I'd carried for 8 months, delivered, nursed, rocked to sleep every night of their lives. Camille picked up Lila, who immediately started crying. Colin lifted Lucas, who reached for me over his shoulder, his little face confused and frightened. "Mama," Lucas said, one of his first clear words. "Mama, I know, sweetheart," Camille cooed, bouncing him artificially. "Mama will see you soon. Aunt Camille is going to take very good care of you." I watched my children disappear down the hallway, carried away by people who'd spent a week psychologically torturing me. Leela's cries echoed through the house until the front door closed. And then there was silence. Complete, devastating silence. I collapsed on the nursery floor, surrounded by toys and clothes and the ghost of my children's presence. Everything I'd fought for, everything Daniel and I had built together was gone. They'd taken my babies, and there was nothing I could do to stop them. "The will reading is in 2 hours," Vivian said from the doorway. Her voice was gentler now, almost kind. They'd won, so they could afford to be magnanimous. "I know this is difficult, but it really is for the best." "For the best," I repeated numbly. "Children need stability, Amira. They need security and routine and resources. You're a young woman with your whole life ahead of you. You can rebuild, start over, maybe even have more children someday with someone more compatible with your background. Someone more compatible with my background. Someone from my social class who wouldn't threaten the Harrington family structure. The custody arrangement doesn't have to be permanent," Camille added, appearing beside her mother. "If you get the help you need, if you can demonstrate stability and the ability to provide appropriate care, we can discuss expanded visitation." They were offering me crumbs. Supervised visits if I proved I was worthy, controlled access to my own children if I played by their rules. "What if I fight this?" I asked. Vivian and Camille exchanged a look. "With what?" Vivian asked gently. "You have no money, no legal representation, no family support. The children are safe and well cared for. Fighting this would only traumatize them further. Besides," Camille added, "Dr. Mercer's evaluation will be part of the court record now. Any lawyer you hire will have to overcome professional testimony about your mental instability. That's a difficult case to win. Even under the best circumstances, they'd thought of everything. They'd created a paper trail of my supposed instability. Removed the children before I could react and position themselves as the responsible relatives, saving everyone from a tragic situation. The will reading," I said finally. "Maybe Daniel left provisions for this situation." Vivian's smile was pitying. "Amira, dear, we've been through this. Daniel's assets were limited and his will can't override court orders regarding child welfare. Whatever he left you, if he left you anything, won't change the fact that Lucas and Lila are better off with family who can provide for them properly." She was right, and we all knew it. Even if Daniel had left me everything he owned, it wouldn't be enough to fight the Harrington machine. They had lawyers, judges, doctors, and 30 years of experience destroying women who got in their way. But I had something they didn't know about. I had the recordings. "I want to shower and change before the will reading," I said. "Of course," Vivian said. "Take all the time you need. This has been traumatic for everyone." After they left, I sat in the empty nursery and made a decision. If I was going down, I was taking them with me. The recordings I'd copied from Daniel's security system would expose their conspiracy, their bribery, their history of destroying families. Even if I couldn't get my children back immediately, I could make sure the world knew what the Harrington family really was. But first, I had to survive the will reading. I had to find out what Daniel had really planned, what weapons he'd left me for this exact battle. I showered, put on the black dress I'd worn to his funeral, and prepared to face the family that had just stolen everything I had left to lose. They thought they'd won completely, that I was broken beyond repair. What they didn't realize was that sometimes losing everything is liberating. When you have nothing left to lose, you can risk everything. And Daniel, my brilliant, loving Daniel, had been counting on exactly that. At 9:45 a.m., I walked downstairs to find the family gathered in the living room. dressed like they were attending a celebration rather than a will reading. Vivian wore pearls and a satisfied smile. Camille was practically glowing with victory. Colin looked like a man who just closed a very profitable business deal. "Ready?" Vivian asked. "Ready?" I replied. What I didn't say was that I was ready for war. Ready to use every weapon Daniel had given me, every piece of evidence I'd gathered, every secret I'd uncovered. They'd taken my children, destroyed my life, and thought they'd won. But the game wasn't over yet. It was just beginning. And in 15 minutes, when Daniel's lawyer opened that will and revealed what my husband had really been planning for the past 8 months, the Harrington family was about to discover that sometimes the people you underestimate the most are the ones who bring down your entire world. The widow they dismissed as weak and broken was about to inherit something far more dangerous than money. She was about to inherit justice. The law office of Prescott Pike and Associates occupied the entire 23rd floor of downtown's most prestigious building. I'd been here before for the signing of Daniel's life insurance policies, back when I thought I understood what our financial future looked like. Now walking through the marble lobby with the Harrington family, I felt like I was entering a courtroom where my execution had already been scheduled. Vivian, Camille, and Colin moved through this space with the casual confidence of people who'd been here countless times before. This was their world, their lawyers, their family's legal fortress. I was just the outsider who temporarily disrupted their carefully ordered universe. But as we approached the conference room, I noticed something strange. Vivian's smile seemed forced, and Camille kept checking her phone nervously. Colin was unusually quiet. None of his typical legal banter about precedents and procedures. "Mrs. Harrington," the receptionist said as we passed. "Mr. Prescott is waiting for you in conference room A." He asked that Mrs. Amar Harrington join him privately for a few minutes before the family session. Vivian's head snapped up. "Privately? That's highly irregular. Family wills are read to all beneficiaries together." "I'm sorry, Mrs. Vivian, but those were Mr. Prescott's specific instructions." "Then let's go make your husband's family very unhappy," as we prepared to join Vivian, Camille, and Colin in the larger conference room. Arthur handed me a sealed envelope. "Daniel asked me to give this to you after you made your choice, regardless of what you decided." Inside was a handwritten letter in Daniel's familiar handwriting. "My dearest Amira, if you're reading this, then the worst has happened and you've seen my family's true nature. I'm sorry I couldn't spare you that pain, but I needed you to understand what we were really fighting against. You are stronger than you know, braver than you believe, and more capable of justice than you realize. The choice you just made, whatever choice you made, was the right one because it came from your heart. If you chose peace, then live beautifully with our children and know that you've given them the greatest gift possible. A mother who chose love over revenge. If you chose war, then fight with everything you have and know that you're not just fighting for us, but for everyone who's ever been told they don't matter enough to defend. Either way, you are not the naive young woman they think they destroyed this week. You are my wife, the mother of my children, and the woman who will decide the fate of people who thought they were untouchable. I love you. I believe in you, and I trust you to use whatever power I've left you with wisdom and strength. Show them who Amira Harrington really is. Forever yours, Daniel Asterisk." I folded the letter carefully and put it in my purse. Then I straightened my shoulders, lifted my chin, and prepared to walk into that conference room, not as the broken widow they'd spent a week destroying, but as the woman who now held their entire world in her hands. The impossible choice was made. Now it was time to show the Harrington family what justice looked like when it had unlimited resources and a mother's fury behind it. "Ready?" Arthur asked. "Ready?" I replied. And for the first time in a week, I truly was. When I walked back into conference room B, Vivian, Camille, and Colin were seated around the polished mahogany table like judges preparing to deliver a death sentence. They'd arranged themselves with Vivian at the head, Camille and Colin flanking her. A united front of Harrington power and authority. The empty chair they'd left for me was at the far end, isolated and diminished. But everything had changed in the 20 minutes I'd spent with Arthur Prescott. I was no longer the broken widow begging for scraps from their table. I was the woman holding a nuclear weapon, and they had no idea what was about to hit them. Finally, Vivian said as I took my seat, "I hope Arthur explained the realities of your situation clearly. We're all eager to finalize this matter and move forward with what's best for everyone, especially the children," Camille added with false concern. I just spoke with the social worker. Lucas and Lila are settling in beautifully at our house. They barely seem to miss. She paused delicately. Well, they're adapting quickly to their new routine. The casual cruelty of it, suggesting my 6-month-old children had already forgotten me, would have destroyed me a week ago. Now it just added fuel to the fire burning in my chest. "Shall we begin?" Arthur asked, opening the file containing Daniel's will. But there was something different in his demeanor now, a formality that hadn't been there during our private conversation. "Please," Colin said, checking his watch. "We have other appointments this afternoon." Arthur cleared his throat and began to read. The last will and testament of Daniel Michael Harrington, dated March 15th of this year. Vivian's eyebrows rose slightly. March was only 2 months ago, well after the twins were born. That was unusual. Most people didn't update their wills so frequently. "To my beloved wife, Amira Elise Harrington, the love of my life and the mother of my children, I leave the following." Arthur paused, looking directly at me. In that pause, I could see him gathering himself for what came next. "I leave to my wife the entirety of my personal estate, including all assets, properties, investments, and holdings that I have accumulated independently of the Harrington Family Trust, totaling approximately $250 million. The silence that followed was absolute. Vivian's face went completely white. Camille's mouth actually fell open. Colin dropped his pen, and it clattered against the table with a sound like a gunshot in the quiet room. "That's impossible," Vivian whispered. Arthur continued reading as if he hadn't heard her. "Additionally, I leave to my wife all documentation, recordings, and evidence I have compiled regarding certain illegal activities conducted by members of the Harrington family over the past 30 years to be used at her discretion in pursuit of justice." "What documentation?" Camille's voice was shrill now, panic creeping in around the edges. "Furthermore," Arthur read, "I leave to my wife the controlling interest in Harrington Industries, Harrington Real Estate Holdings, and Harrington Investment Group, which I acquired through legal purchase of shares from other trust beneficiaries over the past 3 years. Colin stood up so fast his chair fell backward. "This is fraud." Daniel had no independent assets worth more than a few hundred. Zero. Everything he had access to belonged to the family trust. Arthur looked up calmly. "Mr. Prescott, would you like to examine the documentation of these asset transfers? They were all conducted through proper legal channels with full disclosure to relevant parties and appropriate tax filings." "What relevant parties?" Vivian demanded. Her voice barely controlled the trust administrators, the IRS, and the investment firms managing the various portfolios. Daniel had every legal right to convert his trust benefits into personal assets, just as any beneficiary would. Arthur opened another folder and spread documents across the table. Bank statements, investment transfers, real estate purchases, stock acquisitions, everything properly documented and legally executed. Vivian grabbed the nearest document, her hands shaking as she scanned the legal language. "This says he sold his trust share in the pharmaceutical division for $60 million. When did this happen?" 18 months ago. The sale was processed through Harrington Industries' standard procedures for inter-family asset transfers. We never approved any such sale, Camille said, her voice rising. Approval wasn't required, Arthur replied smoothly. Daniel was a full trust beneficiary with the right to liquidate his shares at market value. The trust administrators were legally obligated to process his request. I watched them realize one by one that Daniel had outsmarted them completely. He'd used their own family's complex trust structure against them, extracting his wealth through legitimate channels they'd never bothered to monitor, because they'd assumed he'd never act independently. The real estate holdings alone, Arthur continued, represent over $100 million in current market value. The investment portfolios, the business acquisitions, the liquid assets, it's all properly documented and legally transferred to Mrs. Harrington's ownership. This is impossible, Vivian repeated. But her voice was hollow now. Daniel would never. He wasn't capable of outsmarting you. I spoke for the first time since entering the room, and my voice was steady as steel. Of seeing through your manipulation and planning, accordingly of protecting his wife and children from exactly the kind of behavior you've demonstrated this week. Camille turned to me with fury blazing in her eyes. You knew about this. You've been playing victim while knowing you were going to inherit millions. Actually, I said, standing up and walking to the window. I found out about 20 minutes ago, which means I spent this entire week experiencing your true nature with no knowledge that I had the power to fight back. I turned to face them, and for the first time since Daniel's death, I felt completely in control. I got to see exactly who you really are. When you thought I was powerless, I got to experience your cruelty, your manipulation, your systematic destruction of a grieving mother. I got to watch you steal my children based on fabricated psychological evaluations and corrupt legal proceedings. Now wait just a minute, Colin started. No, I interrupted. You wait because Arthur isn't finished reading the will yet. Arthur nodded and continued. In addition to the financial bequests, I leave to my wife complete access to all security recordings made in the Harrington family residence over the past 2 years, including audio and video documentation of family meetings, private conversations, and planning sessions. The color drained from Camille's face. Security recordings. Daniel installed a comprehensive surveillance system. I explained pleasantly. It captured some fascinating conversations about your plans to destroy me, steal my children, and continue the family tradition of eliminating inconvenient women. I pulled out my phone and played a brief audio clip. Vivian's voice saying she's weaker than Elena was. This one just cries and hopes someone will save her. The sound of her own words seemed to physically stagger Vivian. How much did you record? Camille whispered. Everything. Your conspiracy to file false CPS reports. Your bribery of Dr. Mercer for a predetermined psychological evaluation. Your coordination with judges to ensure custody rulings went your way. Your plans to have me institutionalized if I fought back too hard. Colin was frantically taking notes now, probably calculating legal exposure. Those recordings were made without consent. They're not admissible in court. Actually, Arthur interjected. Recordings made in one's own residence are perfectly legal. And they're not just admissible, they're devastating evidence of criminal conspiracy. But that's not even the best part, I continued, feeling a surge of power I'd never experienced before. Daniel didn't just document this week's behavior. He documented 30 years of Harrington family crimes. I opened the folder Arthur had given me and spread photographs across the table. Elena Prescott's case file. Evidence of the bribery, the perjury, the systematic destruction of her ability to parent her own child. Evidence that you've done this before. Vivian was staring at the photographs like they were venomous snakes. Where did you get these? Daniel hired private investigators 3 years ago. They tracked down Elena's son in Switzerland, interviewed witnesses from the custody case, found documentation of payments to judges and social workers. They built a complete case file proving that you conspired to steal a child from his mother 30 years ago. That was different, Camille said desperately. That woman was unstable. She couldn't provide. She was a single mother who dared to love a Harrington man. I cut her off just like me. The only difference is that Daniel prepared for your attack this time. Arthur cleared his throat. There's one final provision in the will. The room fell silent again. Daniel established a foundation in his wife's name, funded with $50 million, specifically dedicated to helping families fight corrupt custody cases and exposing family court corruption. Mrs. Harrington has full discretion over its operations and funding decisions. A foundation, Vivian repeated numbly, to help other women like Elena Prescott, other families you've probably destroyed over the years, other people who couldn't fight back against unlimited resources and systematic corruption. I walked back to the table and looked each of them in the eye. So here's what's going to happen. Within the next hour, you're going to call Child Protective Services and withdraw your complaint against me. You're going to explain that it was filed based on false information and emotional grief rather than genuine concerns for child welfare. And if we don't, Camille asked, though her voice was barely a whisper, then Arthur files the criminal complaints that have already been prepared. Conspiracy charges, fraud charges, perjury charges. The evidence is comprehensive and irrefutable. You'll spend the next decade fighting federal investigations while your assets are frozen and your reputations are destroyed. You can't prove any of this in court, Colin said. But he sounded like he was trying to convince himself rather than me. I don't have to prove it in court, I replied. I just have to prove it in the media. Daniel's evidence is compelling enough for any journalist who wants to write about powerful families abusing the legal system to steal children from grieving mothers. I leaned forward, placing my hands on the table. The story practically writes itself. Harrington family's dark history. How one of America's wealthiest families systematically destroyed women who threatened their control. Complete with audio recordings, financial records, and witness testimony spanning 3 decades. Vivian was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she realized the magnitude of what they were facing. "What do you want?" she whispered. "I want my children back in my arms within the hour. I want public apologies for your behavior this week. I want you to face consequences for 30 years of criminal activity. And I want to make sure you never hurt another family the way you hurt Elena Prescott and tried to hurt us." "And if we cooperate," Colin asked, "then maybe you face civil consequences instead of criminal ones. Maybe you lose your money instead of your freedom. Maybe you have a chance to salvage some dignity before this is all over." I stood up and walked toward the door. "Arthur will be in touch with the specific terms of your surrender. You have until 5 p.m. today to decide whether you're going to cooperate or whether you're going to fight a battle you cannot possibly win." As I reached the door, I turned back one final time. "Oh, and Vivian, the next time you see Lucas and Layla, you'll be asking permission from their mother to spend time with them if I decide you're worthy of that privilege." I walked out of that conference room, leaving them in stunned silence. The sound of Vivian's quiet sobs following me down the hallway. The woman they tried to destroy had just revealed herself as their judge, jury, and executioner, and the sentence had already been decided. Justice was coming for the Harrington family, and it was wearing the face of the young widow they'd underestimated so catastrophically. 2 hours and 37 minutes after I walked out of that conference room, I was holding my children again. Lucas reached for my face with his tiny hands, babbling excitedly as if he were telling me all about his terrible adventure. Lila immediately settled against my shoulder with a satisfied sigh, like she'd always known I would come for them. They smelled like unfamiliar detergent in someone else's house, but they were mine again, safe in my arms where they belonged. The call to Child Protective Services had come at exactly 2:15 p.m., Camille's voice was barely recognizable, as she explained to Lauren Pierce that the complaint had been filed in error based on emotional grief, rather than genuine child welfare concerns. The emergency custody order was withdrawn within an hour. By 4:00 p.m., Arthur Prescott's legal team had filed preliminary documents with the district attorney's office outlining criminal charges against 3 members of the Harrington family. By 6 p.m., those same documents had been leaked to the city's most aggressive investigative journalist. By midnight, the story was trending on social media. Harrington family scandal audio recordings exposed decades of corruption and child theft. I watched the news coverage from Daniel's study. Now my study with the twins finally asleep in their cribs upstairs. The mansion felt different now that it truly belonged to us. Not lighter exactly, but more honest. The secrets that had poisoned its walls for decades were finally being exposed to daylight. My phone had been ringing constantly since the story broke. Interview requests from national news programs. Calls from other families who'd been destroyed by corrupt custody cases. Messages from women who'd recognized their own stories in the Harrington pattern of abuse. But the call that mattered most came at 11:47 p.m. Mrs. Harrington. The voice was unfamiliar with a slight European accent. "This is Ethan Prescott. I believe you knew my mother, Elena." My heart stopped. Elena Prescott's son, the child who'd been stolen 30 years ago, was calling me from Switzerland. "Ethan," I managed. "I'm so sorry about what happened to your mother. I'm sorry it took this long for the truth to come out." "I saw the news coverage," he said quietly. "The recordings, the documents, the evidence of what my father's family did to her. I wanted to thank you." "You don't need to thank me." "Yes, I do. For 30 years, I believed the lies they told me about her. That she was unstable. That she couldn't take care of me. That she'd abandon me willingly. I believed that until the day she died." His voice broke slightly. "I never got to tell her I was sorry. I never got to tell her I loved her. But because of what you've done, the world will know the truth about who she really was." After I hung up, I sat in Daniel's chair and cried for Elena Prescott, for her son, for all the years of pain that could never be undone. But I also felt something else. The deep satisfaction of knowing that her story would finally be told correctly. The next morning brought consequences swift and severe. Vivian called at 7 a.m., her voice hollow and defeated. "The board is meeting in an hour. They're removing me as chairwoman of all Harrington foundations and businesses." "Good," I replied, not unkindly, but without sympathy. "Amira, please. I know we made mistakes this week, but destroying the family completely won't bring Daniel back. This isn't about bringing Daniel back. This is about making sure you never destroy another family the way you destroyed Elena Prescott's. What about Camille's children? They'll grow up knowing their mother is a criminal. They'll grow up knowing their mother faced consequences for her crimes. That's more than Elena Prescott's son ever got." The criminal charges were filed formally on Monday morning. Conspiracy to commit fraud, perjury, bribery of public officials, and criminal interference with child custody. The evidence Arthur's team presented was so comprehensive that the district attorney called it the most well-documented case of systematic family court corruption in the state's history. Camille and Colin hired the most expensive criminal defense attorneys in the city, but even they admitted privately that the case was unwinnable. The audio recordings alone were devastating, but combined with financial records showing payments to judges and social workers, witness testimony from Elena Prescott's case, and Daniel's 3 years of documented evidence, the defense team was essentially negotiating the terms of surrender rather than fighting the charges. Vivian, at 72 years old, faced the possibility of spending her final years in federal prison. Camille and Colin, with 2 children of their own, were looking at lengthy sentences that would separate them from their family for most of their kids' childhoods. But I wasn't done yet. On Tuesday, I launched the Elena Prescott Foundation with an initial funding of $50 million. The foundation's mission was simple: provide legal and financial support to families fighting corrupt custody cases, investigate and expose judicial misconduct in family courts, and ensure that no parent would ever again face the systematic destruction that Elena had endured. The foundation's first client was a single father in Ohio whose ex-wife's wealthy family had used tactics identical to the Harringtons' playbook. Within a week, we'd hired a team of attorneys, forensic accountants, and investigators who uncovered a pattern of bribery and perjury that led to criminal charges against 4 people and the return of his children. The second client was a young mother in Texas whose situation was so similar to mine that it felt like looking into a mirror. Her husband had died in a military training accident, and his family had immediately moved to gain custody of her daughter using fabricated mental health claims and financial intimidation. We provided her with the same quality legal representation that had saved my family. And within 2 weeks, the custody case was dismissed, and her in-laws were facing their own criminal charges. By the end of the first month, the foundation had received over 3,000 requests for help from families across the country. It seemed that the Harrington family's tactics weren't unique. They were part of a larger pattern of wealthy families using the court system as a weapon against inconvenient relatives. But justice wasn't just about criminal charges and legal victories. It was also about building something better from the wreckage of what came before. 6 months after Daniel's death, I stood in the renovated ballroom of what had once been the Harrington Mansion, now the headquarters of the Elena Prescott Foundation. The room where Vivian had once hosted charity galas for causes she'd never actually cared about was now filled with attorneys, social workers, and advocates working to protect vulnerable families. Lucas was taking his first wobbly steps across the hardwood floor, chasing after a therapy dog we brought in for the children of our clients. Leela was sitting in her high chair, clapping enthusiastically at everything and everyone around her. They were healthy, happy, and growing up in a house dedicated to justice rather than control. Mrs. Hahn had stayed on as my household manager, but her role had evolved into something closer to a family historian. She was working with journalists and documentarians to preserve the stories of all the families the Harringtons had destroyed over the decades, ensuring that their experiences would be part of the historical record. "Any regrets?" she asked, finding me in a quiet moment as I watched my children play. "About which part?" "About choosing war instead of peace. About using Daniel's inheritance to fight rather than just disappearing with the children." I considered the question seriously. My life was more complicated now than it would have been if I'd taken Arthur's offered settlement and moved away quietly. I was constantly in the media, constantly fighting legal battles, constantly bearing the weight of other families' pain. But then I thought about Ethan Prescott finally able to grieve his mother properly because her story had been told truthfully. I thought about the father in Ohio, reunited with his children because he'd had access to the resources needed to fight corruption. I thought about the hundreds of families who would never face what Elena and I had faced because the systems that enabled such abuse were finally being exposed and dismantled. "No regrets," I said. Finally, Daniel was right. I was stronger than I knew. The criminal trials began 8 months after Daniel's death. Vivian, Camille, and Colin had eventually accepted plea bargains rather than faced the full weight of a public trial. Vivian received 2 years in federal prison and lifetime bans from serving on any corporate boards or charitable organizations. Camille and Colin received 18 months each, along with substantial fines and community service requirements. But the real justice wasn't in their sentences. It was in the systematic changes their prosecution had triggered. Family courts across the country were implementing new oversight procedures to prevent the kind of corruption the Harringtons had exploited. Legal aid organizations were receiving increased funding to help families fight wealthy opponents. Judges were facing enhanced scrutiny of their financial relationships with prominent families. The ripple effects of Daniel's carefully planned revelation were still spreading, still changing lives, still preventing other families from facing what we'd endured. On the first anniversary of Daniel's death, I took Lucas and Lila to visit his grave. They were walking now, babbling constantly, their personalities emerging more clearly every day. Lucas had Daniel's thoughtful nature and gentle smile. Lila had his determination and my stubborn streak. "Daddy would be so proud of you both," I told them as we placed fresh flowers on his headstone, "and he'd be proud of what we built together." As we walked back to the car, my phone rang. It was Arthur Prescott with news that another family court judge had been arrested based on evidence the foundation had uncovered, and that 3 more families had been reunited with children who'd been stolen through corrupt proceedings. "Any thoughts about the future?" he asked. "You've accomplished more in 1 year than most advocacy organizations manage in a decade." I looked at my children, healthy and happy and growing up in a world where their mother's love had been strong enough to change systems that had seemed immutable. "I think we're just getting started," I said. That evening, as I tucked Lucas and Lila into their cribs in the nursery Daniel had painted, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. A year ago, I'd been a naive young woman who believed love was enough to overcome any obstacle. I'd trusted people to be kind simply because they shared DNA with the man I loved. I'd assumed justice would prevail simply because I was telling the truth. I'd learned that the world was crueler and more corrupt than I'd ever imagined. But I'd also learned that it was more changeable than I'd ever dared hope. The foundation now had offices in 12 cities and had helped over 200 families fight corruption in family courts. We'd exposed 17 judges for accepting bribes or favors in custody cases. We'd triggered federal investigations into family court systems in 8 states. We'd reunited 43 children with parents who'd lost them to systematic manipulation and abuse. But more than that, we'd changed the conversation. Families facing the kind of assault the Harringtons had launched against me now knew they weren't alone. They knew that resources existed to help them fight back. They knew that wealthy families weren't untouchable and that justice was possible even when it seemed impossible. As I turned off the nursery light and headed to my own room, the master bedroom that now truly felt like home, I thought about Daniel's final letter to me. He'd given me a choice between peace and war, and I'd chosen war. But what he'd really given me was the opportunity to discover who I was when everything I thought I knew about myself had been stripped away. The grieving widow who'd been dismissed as weak and broken had become a force for justice that powerful families across the country now feared. The young mother who'd nearly lost her children to corruption had built a system to ensure other mothers would never face the same threat. The woman who'd hidden a $250 million secret for 1 terrible week had used that secret to tear down an empire built on cruelty and construct something better in its place. My phone buzzed with a text message from a reporter who'd been following our story since the beginning. 1 year later, any message for families facing similar situations? I typed back, "Never let anyone convince you that love isn't strong enough to fight injustice. Sometimes the people who underestimate you the most give you exactly the power you need to prove them wrong." As I settled into bed in the house that had once symbolized everything I thought I'd lost, I realized that Daniel's greatest gift to me hadn't been the money or the evidence or even the legal weapons he'd left me. His greatest gift had been the confidence that I was strong enough to use them wisely. Tomorrow would bring new families in need of help, new battles against corruption, new opportunities to ensure that love really could triumph over power when it was armed with resources and determination. Tonight, my children were safe in their beds. The foundation was changing lives across the country. And the family that had once thought they could destroy me was learning what justice felt like when it came from the woman they'd so catastrophically underestimated. I'd spent 1 week keeping a secret that changed everything. Now I was spending the rest of my life making sure that secret continued to change everything, one rescued family at a time. The widow they dismissed as nothing without her husband had become everything they'd feared she could be. Powerful, uncompromising, and absolutely committed to ensuring their kind of cruelty would never go unpunished again. And this was only the beginning. So to anyone watching who's ever been told they're not strong enough, smart enough, or worthy enough to fight back against people who think they're untouchable, sometimes keeping a secret reveals more than telling the truth ever could. Sometimes the people who try to break you give you exactly the tools you need to break them instead. And sometimes the best revenge is building something so beautiful and powerful from the wreckage of their cruelty that they spend the rest of their lives watching you succeed with the very resources they tried to keep from you. Thank you for listening to my story. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. I share tales of justice and resilience every week. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and if you've ever discovered strength you didn't know you had in your darkest moments. The secret is out, but the story of what we built with it is still being written. And I can't wait to see what chapter comes next.